This next question, gentlemen, takes us a little bit back in time. This is from Cher, another Patreon patron. A different topic, she asks, 9/11. I've never read the reports because I find it boring to figure out what's real and what's not. And then, do I really figure it out? I appreciate your honesty on this one, Cher. I have a million questions about it. I was wondering if you know or ever thought about when this was actually planned. The enormity of just setting up the towers for demolition blows my mind. What that entailed while people are living their lives in the building. How long did it take just for that setup? Do you think it was planned when the towers were built in the 1970s?
I think it's a tremendous tribute to the builders and engineers and architects of the Twin Towers, that having been hit by each of them by a plane, they didn't immediately collapse. I suspect there are very few buildings anywhere in the world that could take an impact like that and not immediately fall. And if that had happened, the casualty hit would have been almost 10 times as great.
I wanted to add that they failed back in 1993. There was a bombing there.
Right.
It was planned, but they really didn't do that much damage to the buildings, at least in comparison.
Since this is something I've studied a little bit about, I don't believe for a minute. I think we often look at the wrong place for where the seeds of failure were met. I agree with Tim and with Chris that the towers were well built for the process of the architecture of the time. The external skeleton, basically the facade itself, is part of the load-bearing structure. That's one of the unique things about the towers. That's why it can be so big and open. It's because the actual walls on the outside, unlike other buildings, buildings built largely in New York are based on a frame. They have steel frames. If you ever go up there, go to the city, you can see how they build these steel frames. They're all kind of steel, and you hang everything on the steel. The towers were unique by the fact that the actual wall, the actual outside, was built to be load bearing, and I think it was a tribute to that. So I think it was a target from '93 on for the terrorists to go after. And I'm one of those that believes that, yes, there was a conspiracy. No, it's not a conspiracy like everybody believes it to be. And it's more about how certain individuals had wanted to make a statement using the towers as a target. And I don't believe for a minute there was any shenanigans regarding the frame itself. The one area that that's not resolved, and I don't care what anybody says, is World Trade 7. World Trade 7 fell later in the day on 9/11, and it looked like a controlled collapse, a controlled demolition, because it fell straight down into its own footprint. And I don't believe fire was the official reason. First off, unless there was, the fuel of the aircraft in the towers. I do believe this. The fuel of the aircraft eventually weakened the structure. If you have that amount of fuel, these aircraft were still full. They were not diminished. So you have that amount of fuel burning that hot at that high with all the wind blowing through. I have no doubt that you could diminish the structural integrity of the frame after a certain point in time. And I do believe that's what collapsed the buildings. With that said, there was no such fuel quantity available to feed the fires in World Trade 7. So the idea that that fires caused the collapse of what was, by the way, the NYPD's command and control center for responding to a threat was actually in World Trade Center. And it's amazing that Rudy and Bernie weren't in it when it happened, because that's where their command center was. Which then, obviously the question needs to be asked: why didn't people go to the command center if that's where it was at? Because apparently there was something about that building. So and that building did not sustain any significant damage from the actual impact of the aircraft. So there are mysteries of that day. It's just not the mysteries that I think people are willing to talk about.
If I may jump in on that, though, having spent a lot of time in my career studying blast effects and the use of explosives for demolishing things in a controlled fashion, shall we say. When the Twin Towers came down, nobody to this day has modeled or studied closely, and can't, I don't think, without sort of rebuilding a Twin Towers mock-up and knocking it down again. The effects of both the immediate blast effects created by and the earthquake type effects created by hundreds of thousands of tons of building descending from almost 1,000 feet up in the air, right next to a building. The fact that it didn't fall, that WTC-7 didn't collapse immediately, to me is not a terrible surprise. That whole area, I would have been very wary of going in and doing anything in for a long time afterwards. There was an earthquake type effects for sure. There was vibration effects, and there was the equivalent of blast effects. And blast can do some really weird things.
There is a little bit of a misunderstanding too with the problem of falling buildings. A building the size of the World Trade Center is not going to fall over like a tree coming down. Buildings, large buildings, most buildings, in fact, even smaller buildings, are built to sustain static loads. That is to say, they're not moving. In a little bit of dynamics, they can vibrate, they can shake a little bit, but they're not huge movements that they're designed to take. The load is compression, it's going down. And if you move a large building, a tall building, off of that center line more than a fairly small amount, the building will break, and the building then comes down. It does not fall over. You move it past a little bit, and it will come down this way. It will break and fall. And that fact, in fact, is why you can, in fact, demolish a building, a large building in the middle of a city. As long as you're not completely screwing it up and tearing off part of the building and pieces falling off, the building will simply collapse in on itself. That's what buildings do. They're not going to fall over. So once you have dumped, in the case of both the World Trade Centers, you've thrown a several 100,000-pound rock into the building, an airplane at 300 plus miles an hour, and then you've burned anywhere from 100,000 to 150,000 pounds of gasoline, essentially kerosene, for a couple of hours. All of it stoked, wind blowing on it. The temperatures get very hot. The buildings get weak, and once the building gets weak, and once it gives just a hint, it goes. It's not going to recover. Once it goes, it goes. And to Tim's point, if you make that kind of load and those kind of shock waves on the next building over, it's a miracle that building stands up. So, is there proof, hard proof? There's never going to be hard proof that some building wasn't, that there wasn't some conspiracy. No one's ever going to be able to disprove a negative. But there is more than enough engineering here and enough just hard data that says 2 airplanes flew into the buildings broke, the buildings burned, and then they broke and they fell, and there was a ripple effect from an engineering perspective. There was a ripple effect on World Trade Center 7.
I don't disagree with both of you on the ripple thing, but that's not what the report really says. You go read what it says. It basically says, and that's where I have a problem with the way, again, the conspiracy theories abound by the fact that people, Tim, nobody went through and explained exactly what you just said in 30 seconds in such a way to make it compelling or people willing to pick up and just say that's correct. And I don't disagree with you. I think that there's a lot of, when you have that amount of shock, of amount of material moving, it's you can't always determine how things are going to fail, and I agree with that. But like I said, it's just no one has sat down and explained that issue, and it's something.
Tony, there's one other indicator in that there was an awful lot of checking for explosive residue. None of that was found around WTC7.
Right.
Thank you for watching this clip of our Ask Us Anything session, part of our Thought to Action series presented by the London Center for Policy Research. If you'd like to see the full Ask Us Anything session, enjoy exclusive content you won't see anywhere else, as well as sneak previews, and to ask your own questions, please become a member of our Patreon page. patreon.com/thought2action. Members will enjoy more exclusive in-depth conversations as well as panel discussions, and live streams are coming. Once again, thank you for being with us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and make your day an excellent one.